explain why the priest wears the white collar around the neck. So this little tab that I have in my collar. I told Deacon Mike it's a tongue depression. Just kidding. So I've never done good historical research to find the origins, but I think that the clerical shirt is a modification of the cassock, which is the long black robe that originally I think had an academic setting. So clerics who taught in university settings wore academic gowns that were black, probably had a white collar that went all the way around. So the way I look at our clerical attire these days is it's a helpful symbol so people know who we are. Sort of like we know that nuns are nuns because they were, or sisters because they're in their habits. Or, police officers because they're in uniforms, or you go to the hospital and doctors have their white coats on typically. So it's our sort of way of outwardly expressing our purpose of here. So I wish I had a better answer. That's the best I could come up with tonight. So, okay, so let's talk about Mary and the saints. And tonight I want to start by talking about the saints. And then we're going to focus on Mary, a preeminent saint, among other things. And you'll see that Mary is preeminent as we get to that point. So the saints. When St. Paul in his letters uses the language of the saints, the holy ones, he typically is referring to all who are Christian. So for Paul, those who are baptized into Christ, who believe in Jesus and are members of the community of faith, are the saints. So there's a beautiful way in which all of us who are baptized and called to the holiness which is of God, that we're already, as it were, saints in the making. But in the Catholic tradition, we use the term saint in a very particular way to refer to anyone who has gone before us from this world, who is now with the Lord in heaven. So the saints are all the holy ones who are now with God in heaven. Since the creation of humanity, anyone now with the Lord in heaven is technically a saint. So you may notice that on November the 1st, we Catholics have a feast called the Feast of All the Saints. When I was a little boy, I thought that, we have these, and that's the second question. When researching saints, I noticed that they all have feast days. What is a feast day? We'll talk more about that. But indeed we do. So you go out throughout the calendar year, and we have a series of celebrations or feast days that commemorate what we call the canonized saints. So what is a canonized saint? The word canon is a rule, a norm, so a list. So the official list of people that we as Catholics believe are in heaven with the Lord, it's not restricted. So when I was a little kid, I thought that November 1st remembered all of the saints that we were celebrating all throughout the calendar year. But actually, the feast is for all the saints beyond the ones that have their own particular feast days. So it's for all the holy men and women of every time and place that have gone before us that are now with the Lord. And for some of us, we may have known individuals in our own personal lives that we believe are now with the Lord. So we could, and I'll say more about ask them for prayers. We can turn to them and ask their prayers on our behalf. If they're with the Lord in the kingdom, they can also offer prayers like the list of canonized saints. So the canon is simply the list of the Catholic, the people that we believe are now with the Lord in heaven. Now, why did we choose to canonize certain saints? Because we wanted to hold up role models. This is what it looks like to live the Christian life, and in a preeminent way. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But indeed, we have literally thousands of canonized saints in the church. So we only have a certain official liturgical calendar that is universal for the whole church that has a limited number of those from the canons or the list of official saints. Some of them are much more well known. If I say the name St. Francis of Assisi, most of you all have heard of St. Francis. You know, he would be very well known. People like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the four gospel writers, you would know those people. St. Paul, who wrote the letters of the New Testament. So some saints are very well known, but since we have thousands of canonized saints, you know, every year when we have confirmation, children will pick saints that I have never heard of. So, you know, there are lots of them that even I don't know about. So, why are saints important? Why is it important to have an official list? I'm going to go into that. I'm going to do that with a handout. So, where's that handout? All right, so this handout has two sides to it. One is called Holy Men and Women 2, P70. The back side is Holy Men and Women 1, P69. We're going to start with Holy Men and Women 2, P70, which is the shorter of the two.
I'm so sorry.
You're good. Don't be sorry. Thank you.
Give me an update.
Thank you.
There's a couple back there that don't come.
All right, we're here.
Hands.
I've got more probably here. Let's see what I can All right, so let's start with Holy Men and Women number 2. By the way, in 2011, there was a new translation of the prayers that we use at the Mass called the Roman Missal. Before that time, for many decades, we had something called a sacramentary, which was the translation after the Second Vatican Council that was used for many decades. This actually comes from a sacramentary. Some of the prayers in the sacramentary I like better because they're easier to understand, they're simpler. When they translated the prayers in the New Missal, they follow the structure of Latin grammar more closely and a little bit more complex. So sometimes you may notice with the prayers of the Mass with the New Roman Missal, it's hard to listen to the prayer and get the significance of it. The original translators after the Second Vatican Council focused on translating so that people in the receiver languages could understand, and the new translation focused more on fidelity to the original text. So that's a subtle difference, but it makes the prayers from the sacramentary just a little easier to understand. So I made copies of the old sacramentary prayers for this evening. So these are called prefaces. This is the prayer that is used right before the Eucharistic prayer. So every Sunday the Lord be with you, and we say now, and with your spirit, lift up your hearts, we lift them up to the Lord. Let us give thanks to the Lord, who is right and just, etc. So then the priest begins the prayer. And what I want you to notice is the prayer of praise is always addressed first to God. Father, all powerful and ever-living God, we do love always and everywhere to give you thanks. So the preface is a prayer to God the Father. You renew the church in every age by raising up men and women, outstanding outstanding in holiness. So there is a quality of what the church is looking for in a saint, someone who is outstanding in holiness. Living witnesses of your unchanging love. So what is it to be holy, to be a living witness of God's unchanging love? So there's a way in which saints are exemplary. They really do express and embody God's love in a very profound and a real way. Notice the next line. They inspire us by their heroic lives. So the purpose of saints is, first of all, to be inspired by their lives. Now, different saints inspire us in different ways. So like someone like Mother Teresa of Calcutta, when people looked at her life, have you thought about what inspired you about Mother Teresa? What would you say inspired you about Mother Teresa? Most everybody knew about her, 20th century saint. Working with the poor. What else? Selflessness. Yeah, she really was selfless. Intense compassion for the suffering, the dying. You know, wherever there was a suffering human being, her heart was drawn. So she really did embody compassion and love, as Jesus and God express infinitely. So the thing that some people don't know about as much about Mother Teresa, I'm just going to do a quick side on Mother Teresa, is that she also is intensely contemplative. So she began each day with at least an hour before the Eucharist and adoration. So this bond with Christ at the beginning of the day led her to her active charity throughout the day. She also had very profound spiritual experiences. And one other little tiny footnote that many people don't know about Mother Teresa is that after she said yes to God's call to minister to the dying and suffering, she expressed a desire to be close to the suffering Christ. For most of the rest of her life, over 50 years I think it was, she experienced a profound desolation, non-awareness of God's love for her, and even at one point lost the hope of heaven itself. So she went through an intense, what we would call spiritual darkness that lasted longer than most saints in the history of the church have ever experienced. And her spiritual biographer said, as she was with suffering human beings when she was alive on the earth who were suffering physically, maybe she's a patron saint for those who suffer spiritual desolation in her death, because she's left us such a beautiful testament that she wrote about. So she's a multifaceted character, but inspired by heroic life for sure. Not many of us could live the life of a Mother Teresa. We might be inspired to do good because of her example, but we might not mirror it in the same exact way, right? Other saints like St. Anthony, who went to Egypt and the desert, and some of the early desert fathers, went out and stood on pillars in the desert for hours on end and had people bring them food, so some of us wouldn't be quite so inspired by that or want to imitate that. But certainly something about their asceticism speaks to the human soul, right? Our desire to be apart and to be with God, for example. So inspiration, second, they help us by their constant prayers to be a living sign of God's saving power. So the saints have a role in helping us from their place in heaven with the Lord. They help us with their prayers. Then we praise you, Lord, with all the angels and saints in their song of joy, with right, Christ-fold, threefold, holy, 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 Lord God of hosts, heaven and earth are full of your glory. Flip the page over, and we'll go to page 69, which is a longer version of Holy Men and Women, number 1. And again, you always start with the praise of God, Father, all powerful, ever living God. We do always and everywhere to give you thanks. You are glorified in your saints, for their glory is the crowning of your gifts. What does this imply? That every saint that inspires us, the origin of their goodness or holiness is God himself. That's the result of God's gifts, not their own unaccompanied effort without God's help. So that's important to remember. In their lives on earth, you give us an example. What does that sound like? Example, same thing as inspiration from the first prayer that we looked at. So they're examples for us. In our communion with them, you give us their friendship. This is a new note. You have a communion with the saints. You have a friendship with them. So this is particularly beautiful from a Catholic point of view. And really it's very Christian, it's ancient Christian belief. We human beings, created in the image and likeness of God, once we pass beyond the boundaries of this mortal world, we are still in a living relationship with those who have gone before us. So some are in the process of journeying toward the kingdom of heaven. So they're experiencing what we call purgation or purgatory, and we believe we can pray for them so that their souls will be fully cleansed and ready to be with the Lord forever. So there is a journey into the kingdom of heaven. So if we die and we're not fully yet transparently free from all sin and its effects on our lives and full of the love of God, God's merciful love beyond death finishes the work that has not yet been finished at the moment of death in that process of purgation. So that's what we call the church suffering, right? So we're the church militant on earth. We're struggling to live the faith here in this world. The church in purgation or suffering, and the church victorious are those who have completed the journey into the kingdom of heaven. So we are in a living communion or relationship with everyone that has died and gone before us. Now we also, of course, I've mentioned a number of times, believe in the capacity of the human being to reject God's love ultimately and completely, and that would be what we call the state of absolute separation from God or hell. And so there is a separation from those who have chosen to be forever isolated, apart from God. So now it is interesting, I mentioned we have an official list of people we believe are with the Lord in heaven. That's what we call the canon of saints. But we don't have any canon or list of people we believe that are forever damned. We've never attempted to make such a judgment about any particular human persons in the history of humanity. So, first note, they give us an example, and our communion with them, we have friendship. In their prayers for the church, so we're back to the role of their interceding or praying on our behalf, you give us strength and protection. So their prayers, the prayers of the saints, are in this sense channels through which God is giving us greater strength and protection. So and sometimes people will ask, why do you Catholics pray to the saints, or why do you ask for their prayers? And the answer is, when we have something going on in this life and we're suffering, we're struggling with something, we readily turn to a friend and say, would you say a prayer for me, right? So that's exactly what we're doing with the saints. My friend, I believe, is now with the Lord in the kingdom, so why not ask that friend also to pray on my behalf, just like I would ask a friend on earth. So that's the role of the saint. They desire to pray for us even more than we would desire to ask them for prayers. So that's the beautiful role of their prayer on our behalf. This great company of witnesses spurs us on to victory to share their prize of everlasting glory through through Jesus Christ our Lord. On the Feast of All the Saints, I can't remember who the church father is, it may be St. Leo the Great. He wrote a reflection that's in the official liturgy of the church that day for the office of readings. And he said, why are we on earth so tepid about going to heaven when the saints so desire us to be with them in that everlasting joy and happiness? So you get the sense that the saints are more desirous of our appointment with God than we ourselves are sometimes. Dead battery. Josh is like the saints. He knows we need help before we even know it. He provides remedies, right? So this is why saints are so important in the spirituality of a Catholic. For those reasons, they're examples that motivate us, they inspire us. We believe we're in a living communion with them, that we're connected to them as brothers and sisters in Christ. They belong to our family of faith, just like we belong to each other in this world. They're all parts of the body of Christ. And so we're connected. Even the greatest of saints in the history of the church, we look back for 2,000 years, we can develop and cultivate a relationship with them. So many, many years ago, I read a little book called The Story of a Soul about the life of Saint Therese of Lisieux. She was a young woman who was in a Carmelite monastery, and she didn't live a long life. She lived a very hidden life, but her spiritual director or superior made her write down her spiritual experience with God. It's a little slim volume. And when you read it, it is so incredibly moving. She talks about how she had this deep longing to be a priest or to be a martyr or to be an apostle. But here she was, living in this hidden way in a Carmelite monastery. And the Lord said to her, through the Apostle Paul, she was reading Paul, you know, Therese, I want you to be loved right in the heart of the church. That's your vocation. And she had this profound spiritual experience, and she knew it was true. God, you've called me to be loved right where you've put me. And that's what so in this hidden way, she lived an extraordinary life of holiness. So when I read that little spiritual testament, I was so inspired by her that I started thinking about her and started connecting with her in a living relationship. And then as I got toward the end of that little spiritual testament, she said, I want to spend my time in heaven doing good things on earth. So I really want to pray for people in this world. And she said, and I will pray in a special way for priests, especially troubled priests. So when I'm troubled, I'm like, Therese, please, turn to you. She just wanted to be a flower in the garden of God, you know. And so people say, they said prayer to Therese of Lisieux to ask for help and for God, to pray to God on our behalf. And one of the signs that she's heard the prayer is that roses appear suddenly, and that's sort of kind of one of the symbols associated with Therese of Lisieux. But you know, when she said, I want to just be the most humble flower in the bouquet, she wasn't thinking about a rose, she was thinking of like a daisy. So I was walking one day on a retreat, and I was thinking of Therese of Lisieux's humble request, just to be a humble flower in the garden of God, just like a daisy. I'm walking by a lake, and I see one single daisy by a lake at this retreat place. When do you see one daisy? Right? When do you see kind of like a bunch of them together? It was like, I never saw one daisy before. And I was like, this is, Therese, are you speaking to me? And so I walked over and I looked down at that daisy, and it was a big, tall daisy, about that tall. And then I looked at it carefully, and there was a little small daisy right beneath it in its shade, just about 2 or 3 inches out of the ground. I was like, oh, Therese. I was like, I feel like I'm that little daisy under you, the big daisy. I was like, thank you for this gift, you know. I say we Catholics, we see the work of God in all created things. This is how Catholic spirituality works, how we embody awareness. God is always speaking to us. Now, what other thing with saints? All Catholics have their saints that they like particularly. So their favorite saints that they pray to or turn to for different things. It's an odd sound, isn't it? What could that be, Josh? Disappear when you said that mechanical thing. Yeah. Okay. Who knows? Who knows? So
I still
is the saint sending a message or something? So sometimes when I'm preaching a very difficult homily, like I've had to do homilies for the victims of suicide or a homicide once, and so those are formidable things for a preacher. And so as I was praying prayerfully, I began to turn to the greatest preachers in the history of the church. St. Ambrose, St. Augustine, St. Leo, St. John Chrysostom. They were all incredibly good preachers of the gospel of St. Paul. And I just pray for me that I will well proclaim the gospel as I preach. So, and then sometimes at night, when I wake up, like I can't fall back to sleep right away. And in the old days, I would worry about things. This problem in my mind I can't get out of my brain. So I started using the alphabet. And I do funny things with it. Okay, I'll think about foods, okay. Anchovies, bacon, cheddar cheese, desserts, eggs. I'll go through categories. But one of my favorite things to do are saints. So I know enough saints that I can start asking for their help. St. Augustine, pray for me. St. Ambrose, pray for me. Start with 8 letters. St. Anastasia, let me go to B. St. Benedict, St. Bernard, all the way down the line. What happens if you come to a particular place you can't think of a saint? I just move to the next letter, so don't worry. Dead battery. Oh, that's what was happening. The battery's dead. The battery is dead. There's another battery. All right, we had a bad battery charger. This one may not last too long. That's a sign, right? Y'all will listen to me without batteries, I guess, if we have to. So, all right. So, and then, by the way, also different saints are associated with different things. So, like Saint Michael the Archangel is the patron of, for example, police officers. So, if you're a police officer, you might turn to Saint Michael the Archangel and ask his intercession. One of the famous saints is St. Anthony, is the patron saint of lost things. So a lot of people will ask St. Anthony for help in finding things. And I must admit that he has been really helpful with me finding lost things. So if any of you want to hear funny stories, I've had some really good funny stories about St. Anthony helping me. I have this friend who was cleaning the house. She was the cleaner at St. Matthew, and she was not Catholic, and she was, at one point I suggested that she ask one of the saints to pray on her behalf, and she said, I go to Jesus. And I said, okay, that's fine. So, but she lost her wedding ring, and she was really upset about it, and it had been lost for days or weeks. I said, where's the last time you had it? She said, I think it was my car, but I've searched the car, I've cleaned it, in fact, I've done the whole thing. I was like, well, let's go take one more look. It's not there, Father Beckman. I know it's not. I said, let's go look just to please me, okay? So as I'm walking out to the car, I silently said a prayer to St. Anthony. I said, please help us to find her wedding ring. When I got to the car, I looked, and she had a sunroof, and I leaned over her seat, and all of a sudden, I see this brilliant glitter of light, and I reached reached straight down, and there it is, and I pulled it right out. She couldn't believe it. I said, well, I just need to tell you. It's just so you know who gets the credit for it. So, I'm being a little humorous, but it's a true story, you know. And so studying the lives of the saints, learning about them, being inspired by them, developing connections with them, and because we have this feast on November 1st of All the Saints, some of us have known personally very holy men or women that have now left this world, and we believe they're with the Lord. They're not on the official list of the church, but we have a moral certitude in our heart that they're now with the Lord, and we can turn to them and say, there are people now in life, and I turn to them. And those moments of need, and I ask for their prayers on my behalf. So I think it's a beautiful connection that we Catholics have with saints. All right, questions about the saints?
So you said Saint Michael the Archangel and that. So the angels are saints?
Technically, angels are actually not saints. That is true. Even though we call him Saint Michael, angels are angels and saints are saints. The difference is angels were created by God as pure spirits. They never had bodies. So, and human beings who are now with the Lord in heaven are become saints. We don't become angels. So that's the difference between a saint and an angel. But we do call the archangel a saint, like Saint Michael, Saint Raphael, Saint Gabriel. But they're really angels and not saints, technically.
Is there a saint for every day of the year? Is there a saint for weekday?
Yes, there is a saint. There's actually a whole bunch of saints for every day of the year. Not many of them always fall on what we call the official Roman calendar today. So there are many days that we don't have a listed saint these days. And some saints, the way the church has of its liturgical celebrations, you're required to celebrate them, and others are just optional. And sometimes there's 2 or 3 in a day. You can pick one of them or not do any of them. But there are a saint lists there are lists of saints that have been canonized through the centuries. So if you do Google research, you could find many, many saints for every day of the year. I'm sure you have February 29th. So yes, saints all over. And it's good if you know your own name, your baptismal name, for example, is connected with any saint.
What's the difference between somebody who is blessed and saint?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question. All right, so the canonization process. How do we as Catholics today figure out who we're going to add to the official list? In the early church, it was usually by what we would call acclamation. So someone like St. Jerome, for example, was so extraordinarily holy, living in the holy places in the Holy Land, and renowned scripture scholar. But often when a person died, the local community immediately created a cult in honor of that person. The word cult means they recognize the holiness of the person, that they're a saint with God. So in the early church, that was done by acclamation. Sort of like Pope John Paul II, when he died, people in St. Peter's Basilica spontaneously, thousands, tens of thousands began to chant Sancto Subito, saint immediately. So John Paul II would be an example of someone who in the early church, or Mother Teresa, would be instantly recognized as a saint by the people of God. So that would be before we had a formal process. Today, there is a formal process called canonization, and we have to study the life of the person to see, in fact, if there was evidence of heroic holiness, and make sure there's no compelling evidence that they didn't turn from that holiness before they died, right? And then, once there's compelling evidence, they study their cause for sainthood, they're venerable, and if there is a miracle attributed to their intercession after they die, so for example, let's say, and each canonized saint using the formal process, who didn't die by martyrdom, so if you're murdered for the faith, then you don't have to do miracles, because your holiness is recognized. But for others, you know a person, you believe that the person is with the Lord, and you ask their intercession for a miracle, and a miracle happens. That cannot be explained with ordinary human scientific evidence. There's a panel of medical scientific experts that study those things. Then if a miracle is recognized, they're beatified. So then they're called blessed, Blessed John of the Cross. Once a second miracle is attributed, they are canonized, added to the official canon, and then they're normally called saint. But blessed in the broad sense of that term now, in the liturgy is used of even canonized saints. So in the prayers it can say Blessed John of the Cross, even though we know he's already a canonized saint, which gets a little confusing in the current translation. So blessed and saint mean the same thing in the current liturgy translation in English of the church. So that can be a little questionable at times for people to figure out the difference between a blessed and a saint. Any other saint questions?
How does the church explain the incorruptibles, Father?
Yeah, incorruptible, so bodies that don't corrupt in an ordinary way, that has to be, again, an extraordinary work of God. So sometimes bodies of saints do not decompose in the normal decomposition process, and they're preserved in sometimes even in glass cases, so the faithful can see them. And sometimes the church attributes that to the work of God, to be a sign of that person's heroic holiness. Now, this is a little more strange for non-Catholics and even for some Catholics, including at times myself. But, the places where saints were buried were seen as especially important. So they often would celebrate Mass over the burial site of the saint as a place of remembrance and asking that saint's intercession. And during the course of the centuries, because people all wanted a piece of the saints, they started taking apart the bodies and took parts of the body so that you could have prayers in different places throughout the world with a part of that saint, like a finger or a toe or something they touch. And so these are what we call relics. And so there are relics of the saints spread all over the world, which is a little bit anomalous because the church normally wants you to bury the body together or the remains together in one place. So, and in fact, in not every, but most altars, there are relics of the saints. So below the altar here at St. Henry, there are 3 separate reliquaries, or I think there are 3 underneath it in the floor, 3 different saints. And please don't ask me who they are because I can't remember off the top of my head. So that's a little less known feature sometimes of the cult of saints in the Catholic Church. So when you hear about relics, that's what we're talking about. So a first-class relic is part of the body of the saint. I think a second-class or their classes might be something they touched. So St. John Paul II wore a cassock, and I think there are some things at Pope John Paul II High School that were worn by Pope John Paul II. Those would be technically relics because they were touched by the saint. Okay, so any other questions about saints before I talk about Mary?
I don't remember his name, but the priest that founded the Knights of Columbus has recently had the second miracle.
Oh.
Been certified, and it was in Dixon, Tennessee.
So that means that it was the second miracle then that once that process is complete, he will no longer be a blessed, he'll be a saint.
And they had already said, okay.
And they may have scheduled a date to canonize him. There's usually a ceremony.
A couple of them are praying for a sick child.
I think I saw that in the Tennessee Register, actually. So. All right, I do not want to run out of time for Mary because she is the preeminent of all the saints. She occupies a very unique place in the history of the human family because when God in fullness of time chose to become human, he selected one woman So Mary is blessed beyond all other women, blessed beyond all other human beings, aside from Christ himself, because she alone was chosen by God to be the mother of his beloved Son. So you all may remember when I talked about the person of Jesus in the early church, one of the early titles given to Mary in Greek was she was the Theotokos. In Greek, literally means God-bearer. We translate it into English these days. She is Mother of God. And so that feast day, January 1st, is the feast of Mary, Mother of God. The fact that she is the mother of Jesus Christ, our Lord and God, our Redeemer and Savior, that gives her a unique place in all of human history. No other woman was chosen by God from the moment God created the human family until the end of time. So Mary stands, in that sense, apart from the rest of humanity in being chosen for that unique vocation. And Mary, and we celebrate that on March the 25th, was approached by the angel Gabriel, which we read about in the Gospel of Luke. And Gabriel announced to Mary that she would indeed have been chosen by God to be the mother of his beloved Son. And Mary said, yes, let it be done to me according to your word. So in that sense, Mary is a model for all Christians, that God always takes the initiative inviting us to say yes, and the appropriate human response to whatever vocation God calls each of us to, and the core vocation is our yes to God. I will be who you created me to be, God. Our yes should mirror that of Mary's. So in that sense, Mary is fully human in every way that you and I are, with one exception. We believe that Mary was preserved by God from the very moment she was conceived in the womb of her mother from all sin. So untouched by original sin that affects all human beings, and also that Mary never sinned, never turned aside from God's will for her. And you might say, well, where does that show up in the scriptures? And the closest answer I can give you is that when the angel appears to Mary, the angel Gabriel, what does the angel say to Mary? Hail, full of grace, singularly graced by God. So fullness of grace, we see that as acknowledgement that even before Mary became pregnant with Christ, she was filled with the grace of God, and thus untouched by sin. So on December the 8th, we have a feast day that celebrates the Immaculate Conception of Mary and her sinlessness throughout her life on earth. Now, we also believe that that grace that Mary received is a gift that comes from the dying and rising of Christ on the cross. So it conveniently goes back in time to prevent Mary from being touched by sin. But the grace that saves all human beings that flows from Jesus himself dying for us on the cross and rising from the dead is also what kept Mary sinless from the first moment of her conception. So the grace of Christ, in a sense, goes forward and backward in time. That's why all the just since the foundation of the world, since the creation of Adam, can have a share in the resurrection because of Christ dying and rising. So that's a unique thing about Mary. Mary is also our mother and intercessor. And how do we know that Mary is our mother? Because when she is at the foot of the cross with John the Apostle, the beloved disciple, Jesus, as he was dying, says to John, the beloved disciple, behold your mother. And to her, she says, behold your son. So we see that as the moment when Christ was basically communicating to us that all of us who would be his disciples would also have Mary as our mother, and that we would be considered by Mary also as her children, because we are now part of Christ, we're members of the body of Christ. So she too is our mother, and we are, in a sense, her children. So there's something really beautiful about that maternal care of Mary on behalf of all Christians, and I would say indeed on behalf of all humankind. So there are many names and titles through the centuries that have been given to Mary, things like Star of the Sea, the Gate of Heaven, the Queen of Heaven and Earth. So there are many beautiful honorific titles that all go back to that unique role, and I would say pivotal role, of Mary's great yes to being the mother of Jesus Christ, God who became human. So that's the focal point from which everything else flows when you're trying to understand who Mary is. So one cannot understand Mary apart from her son Jesus. And we would also say that were it not for Mary, of course, God would not have become human. So Mary offers her humanity. It's through the power of the Holy Spirit that she conceives. Both Matthew and Luke make that clear. So the human DNA, as it were, is from Mary. And so Jesus is both fully human, fully divine. He has a fully human mother. Mary fully and truly is the mother of Jesus, who is God incarnate. So is that a mystery? Absolutely, right? That God would become human and choose to partner with a woman to do so. This is, we say, it's in Latin sui generis, it's a one-of-a-kind creature through which God has chosen to enter the universe. So I love the prayers at Christmas when we speak about the incarnation, because we say that heaven and earth are now wed, brought together. Creation and creator are made one in Christ because of Mary's yes and God's preeminent action. So beautiful partnership. So all throughout the liturgical year, we mentioned there are feasts of the saints. Every single month we also have various feasts of Mary, focus on different dimensions of who Mary is. And I'll give you examples. The Annunciation in March, which I've mentioned. We do in May what we call the Feast of the Visitation, commemorating the time when Mary visited Elizabeth, her kinswoman, recorded in the Gospel of Luke. We have the dedication of St. Mary Major Church, for example, in August, a church that was built in honor of Mary in the city of Rome. The Queenship of Mary, the Assumption of Mary. I should add, too, that we believe that at the end of her life on earth, that Mary was taken body and soul to be forever with the Lord in heaven. So the rest of us, when we die, if we're without sin and its attachment, we don't have to experience any purgation, and we go to be directly with the Lord, and we go as souls, and in the resurrection of the dead, at the end of time and creation, we will have resurrected bodies or glorified bodies. Now, we'll talk more about heaven, hell, and purgatory in several weeks before Easter. We get closer. That's my last topic. And I'll talk more about heaven, hell, and purgatory, what happens after death. But suffice it to say right now that we believe that where Mary is with the Lord, we all hope to be someday. And that she is as close to the heart of her Son there, who is at the right hand of the Father, as any other saint in heaven, closer. And so, and why should we ask Mary's prayers on our behalf? Who can say no to their mother, right? When your mother makes a request of you, who can say no to your mom, you know? So we think that will she ever ask the Lord for anything the Lord doesn't want to do already? No, certainly not. Her heart and the heart of her Son are already one in all things. Christ himself desires all that is good for us. And when Mary prays on our behalf, she's only praying for that which Christ himself desires to give us. But it's interesting because God chose to make human beings, including Mary preeminently, partners. So we can really help each other, both in this world and the journey into the next, which is a beautiful thing, that God could directly do things for us, and he does sometimes, but he also works in and through each other. So sometimes when I'm feeling lonely, God might know that, and he might console my heart directly, and suddenly I feel closeness to my Creator. At another time, God might inspire a friend to pick up the phone and call me, and I don't feel alone anymore, and God really did work through the love and care of another human friend. So God created us and chose us to be co-partners, as it were, in this beautiful work of salvation. Isn't that a beautiful thing? That we can help each other, and Mary can preeminently help us because of that unique relationship that she has with her son. So, now we'll also add, and you will hear about this too, that, and this has happened more in the last 500 years, let's say, than in the first 1500 years of Christianity. One may wonder why, perhaps early on people felt an immediate closeness to God always in early Christianity and in the medieval period, but maybe in the modern world we feel more isolated and separated. So God, it seems, has to reach out in different forms in the modern world to touch the human heart. And one of the things that's happened in recent centuries is that Mary herself has been sent by the Lord and appeared, we believe, in various places. So no Catholic is required to accept a private revelation or appearance of Mary, but we study them to see, is this an authentic appearance of Mary? Do we believe it? And if it's consistent with what we believe, and it seems to be true to the faith and teachings of the church and the revelation of the gospel, and it's promoting the good of the Christian people, the church will judge it to be an authentic apparition. So some of the most famous that you may have heard of happened in Lourdes, France. So the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared there to children, also in Fatima in Portugal, in Guadalupe to a simple Indian by the name of Juan Diego. So there are places in the world, those are some of the most famous, where Mary, and often, who does Mary choose to appear to? Often it is people who are suffering, who are not part of the establishment, but are often uneducated, to children, to sinners, to the sick, to suffering, and she promises her special care in those moments in time. It is said, by the way, that the Spanish conquistadors were remarkably ineffective at converting people to Christianity until Our Lady of Guadalupe appeared, and she appeared in the clothing of the Native American Aztec garments that they understood, the local people. And when they saw her wearing their face, that she was one of them, they said millions converted to Christian faith as a result of that appearance at Guadalupe. So God, it seems, at times, uses such what we call private revelations to bring about an abundance of grace in the world. One of the ones that I happened to visit was the one in Knock in Ireland, and there Mary and I think it was Joseph and John the Baptist or John the Evangelist, it was a trio of saints that appeared on a rainy day. And one of the things I like about it is the church secretary was walking by and saw them in the field in front of the church and thought the pastor had bought new statues and not told her about it. And other people began to notice that these figures were in the yard in the rain, they're not getting wet. And the pastor had been out visiting the sick, and he had arrived back to the rectory, his house, and they rushed in and said, "Father, they look like saints on the front lawn of the church." And he said, "I'm tired from visiting the sick, I don't have time to go out there." He missed the whole apparition of parish priest. And so I have a special place in my heart for the parish priest, because he, like many of us, would be skeptical and didn't respond right away. And but there's a beautiful shrine there. Pope John Paul II went there when he was Pope, and you can visit that place. It's a magnificent chapel where outdoor masses are celebrated. You still get the feel of the countryside, what it was like when that apparition happened. One of the odd things about that apparition was, in most cases, Mary will say things like repent from sin and pray for charity and, pray to avoid war. She'll give messages. At Knock, she and the other saints were silent. They never said anything. So it was their presence alone that spoke to the people of the community at Knock. So many more things could be said about Mary. This is just a snack, as it were, an appetizer about Mary and the saints. Some questions. I think if you want to get close to Mary and to Jesus, you've heard me say this in some homilies, one of the things that will stir that up in you is visiting the Holy Land. So if you ever go to Israel, to these places where all these events took place, you feel a very close connection to Jesus himself for sure, and also to Mary, because almost every mystery of the Rosary, there's a place in the Holy Land you can visit that connects you with that mystery. So that's the beautiful thing about going on a pilgrimage. And I'll give you a hint. It's a possibility there might be a pilgrimage to the Holy Land next year. So keep your ears tuned. Deacon Mike, do you want to say anything before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just wanted to, Margaret asked me to make this quick announcement, and I want to be back up here to do that. Sorry.
Please do.
Okay. This is the Faith and Justice Ministry on February 28th. Join them for a soup supper showing the movie The Letter, A Message for Our Earth, which tells a moving story about Pope Francis and his landmark encyclical Laudato Si. The supper event will also feature Catholic scientist David Wright, who will share his perspective of the state of our planet. The whole parish is invited, and if you want more information, Margaret Cook, who is one of the volunteers here, her email address sort of get you on the list, but I just wanted to mention that because she asked and it'd be a great thing. So
February 28th.
February 28th.
So that's Tuesday
Tuesday
night,
night.
last day of February, right? Because we want to leave here this year.
Right.
I'll just add about that. Pope Francis wrote that beautiful encyclical, which the film will be about, on caring for planet Earth. But he was not the first pope who has been attentive to these things. In fact, Pope Benedict at one time was called the Green Pope because he was so concerned about the environment. And as someone like myself who has spent a load of time in the natural world, I love national parks and hiking. I've been watching what's happening to our planet and how we've been developing the world a lot, tearing down forests and so forth. I think the care for our planet is one of the urgent needs of the 21st century. There are, 6 billion human beings on the planet now, and we've got to preserve this planet for future generations also. So I think the great task in this century will be to care for this planet as we go forward. If we don't care for it well, all human beings will suffer as a result. That will be the end result. And how many, I grieve that our grandchildren may grow up in a world that may no longer have things like elephants and lions and tigers and giraffes. If there's not enough habitat left to preserve this beautiful diversity of life that God has created. So we are, as some of the Eucharistic prayers, we're stewards of creation. God has called us to be caretakers of that creation. So if you can come that night, that would be inspiring. All right. Thank you for that advertisement, Deacon Mike, and we'll share on our tables. So.